the pro-environment stance is contaminated by an anti-capitalist rhetoric. Now, the problem with the socialists, so let's take this apart a little bit. I mean, the socialists always point out something that's true. And Marx pointed this out, but it wasn't Marx's discovery. And he's like seriously wrong about it in an important way. So Marx observed that money tends to aggregate in the hands of fewer and fewer people. Okay, the first question is that true? And the answer is, not only is that true, it's so true that you can model the distribution of money in a population using equations derived from physics. Like, it's really unbelievably true. But then Marx said, that's capitalism. That is not true. And it's actually an underestimation of the problem, because if the problem of inequality, which is an actual problem, was as simple as let's change capitalism, well, yeah, let's change capitalism. Unfortunately, the problem is so deep that changing capitalism won't change the problem at all. And in fact, in most of the places where it's being attempted, especially the more radical forms of communism, let's say, rather than socialism, because we can distinguish the two, and should, it's important to do so. In countries that became communist, it wasn't like a small percentage of the people still didn't own all the resources. It's just that there were hardly any resources and almost everyone had nothing. There was still a tiny fraction of people who were the privileged elite. And so, you know, if you play Monopoly, what happens when you play Monopoly? Everybody starts out equal, and one, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so you can actually model this problem with something as simple as a Monopoly game. That's actually a fairly good model of how money distributes itself in the environment. And you can blame that on capitalism, but you can get exactly the same result if you have people trade because they flip a dice. So if you took 100 people, let's say you give 100 people $10 each, and then they had to trade with each other. If you flip a coin and I flip a coin, and if we flip a coin, if it's heads, you get $1. And so that's your game. Heads gives you $1. If you play that out till it concludes, what happens is some people lose, let's say they have $10. They lose 10 times in a row. Well, then what happens? At zero, well, they can't trade anymore. So what happens is that people lose at different rates, but if you lose enough, even if it takes you 100 trades to lose all your money, as soon as you hit zero, you're done. If you play that out to its conclusion, even though it's random, completely random, the trading, one person ends up with all the money and everyone else ends up with zero. And so I'm a member of a native Canadian family, West Coast Indian family, native family. And this particular culture had a tradition, the potlatch. And they had the same problem in their culture. And the problem was that some of the big chiefs over some period of time would end up with like all the stuff, all of it. And that wasn't good because, well, for obvious reasons, you know, it would destabilize the society. That's in some sense the least of the problems. And so they evolved this mechanism. They'd have these big celebrations that rich people would put on where status was determined by how much of that wealth you would give away. Right. And that was the potlatch. Yeah, they had to do it. And back well, that's philanthropy, right? Like, people really looked very highly upon very wealthy people that engaged in a lot of philanthropy. Yeah, well, and this might be a biased sample, but I don't think so. And if it is, it's biased towards entrepreneur conservative types who you would think in the parity sense would be the least likely to do this. I haven't met anyone who has a vast fortune whose primary concern isn't what the hell can I do with all this money that's beneficial as fast as possible. They're not sitting around thinking, I need another super yacht. Now, look, there's going to be people like that, you know, but I haven't met any of them.
Have you met Jeff Bezos?
No, I haven't. I haven't met Bezos. But
I bet he's got a couple super yachts.
I'm sure he does. But like, I'm pretty happy about the fact that he's building rocket ships, and that actually takes a lot of capital. Yeah. You know, and the other thing there's a couple of other things about capitalism that are worth thinking about. One is all the evidence suggests that relatively free markets are the best way to make the absolutely poor richer. That's not an inequality issue. It's just that while they're not starving, and that's something, we've lifted more people out of poverty in the last 15 years than in the entire course of human history.
Can I pause you for a second there? One point that I forgot. I read this the other day that where Karl Marx is buried, they have to charge money because they have to maintain it. And they need money to maintain it, which make sure that's true.
Yeah.
Because it's hilarious. I read that and it was like a meme, and I was like, "Is that real?"
My daughter once,
that is kind of funny.
My daughter once bought me a 50% off Karl Marx doll, which I thought was just ridiculous, and she bought it for that reason.
She told me
it's so funny. It was
now,
so funny.
Capitalism.
Yeah.
Here's when people start talking about capitalism, and we talk about capitalism uplifting poor people. One of the issues that a lot of people have in this country is when you ship jobs overseas and you ship companies start manufacturing things overseas for essentially pennies on the dollar.
Yeah.
I mean, this is like, it's one of the great contradictions
Right.
to the progressives in America, that they complain about capitalism on a fucking iPhone. Because if you knew where that iPhone was, if you went down to the factory where that iPhone was manufactured, you'd be heartbroken. If you went further to where the minerals are dug out of the ground in the Congo, you'd be devastated. Like, that's the reality of capitalism. That's the reality of sending jobs overseas. The cure to that is a more even distribution of wealth within the company, meaning that the company would have to, and I'm not picking on Apple, like any company, name them, they would have to pay the people that work there a decent living wage with great benefits and health insurance and dental and all the stuff that people want and need in order to feel secure and safe. Give them a great working environment, don't overwork them, and now how much money do you have? Because the amount of money that Apple has put aside, and obviously I'm an Apple fan. I have an Apple phone right here. I'm not picking on Apple. But they are one of the richest companies that's ever existed on the face of planet Earth. But how are they doing that? One of the ways they're doing that is by paying people very little to make their products that they sell for a giant amount of money. Yeah, so what's the solution to that?
Well,
is the solution to pay people a fair amount? And if you do that, is the solution to pay people a fair amount in another country? Or is the solution to pay people a fair amount here where we can regulate it? Because we do manufacture some things here, but we manufacture way less than we used to because it costs too much money to do so. But that word too much, or that phrase too much, is bullshit. It's not that it costs too much. It's just that it costs more. And they don't want to pay it. They would rather just reap in profits, and the way they do that is on the backs of poor people.
Yeah, well,
now, if you do that on the backs of poor people...
We could take that apart a bit.
Right.
And so,
but here's my question. If you really wanted to make these other countries, like third world countries, and raise them up and really increase the economy, what you would do is pay people in third world countries where you have these plants the same amount that you would have to pay them in America. Then you'd have a complete change in those environments.